We begin with the Supreme Court nomination process and its possible delay. Senator Ben Ray Luján, a Democrat from New Mexico, has suffered a stroke. His team said today that he will make a full recovery, but will not be back in Washington for another 4 to 6 weeks. President Biden has said he hopes to announce a nominee for the High Court by the end of this month. For more, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Philip Bump. Caitlin is a political reporter for CBS News, and Philip is a national correspondent for the Washington Post. Caitlin, a senior aide to New Mexico Senator Ben Ray Luján, tells our Ed O'Keefe that the Democrat is expected to return to Washington, and this is the timeline, 4 to 6 weeks. What does that mean for the president's timeline, for the Supreme Court, and the basic legislative agenda?
Well, the president does have some time with the Supreme Court nominee, so 4 to 6 weeks. Luján could be back, if that is, in fact, what the timeline is, could be back to vote on something regarding the nominee. But it really underscores how fragile this Democratic coalition in the Senate is and how razor thin the Democrats have in terms of the majority. So kind of bigger picture here, this not only has implications for the Supreme Court pick, but also everything that Congress needs to do between now and then. This could really stymie the Senate's work on everything from other nominees and appointments to just the regular everyday work of the Senate. Without that vote, everything is much more difficult. We know how difficult, how that majority played out last month with the failure of voting rights, with the legislation, with the failure of the president's Build Back Better agenda, just losing that one vote from Manchin. They couldn't move forward. So this really shows in the bigger picture just how fragile this coalition is, especially heading into the midterm season where the president and the administration and Democrats want to show a united front. They also need to get a lot of things done to be able to go and campaign on those issues. So even just having one senator out makes a big difference and raises questions, for the next several months. If someone gets sick, if someone, has something else come up, every vote really matters here.
Can sometimes get blasé even when staring at a historic moment. What do you think the White House messaging is going to be over the next moment to underscore what a historic moment this is, not just for the nation, but for the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that the White House has already sort of gotten out in front of the idea that President Biden is doing something unusual here, right? Obviously, on the campaign trail, he made this commitment to pick a candidate for any Supreme Court openings who was a black woman, and he's followed, or I shouldn't say he's followed through. We all assume he's going to follow through on this. There's no indication he's not going to. Getting a little ahead of myself here, but there's every indication that he's going to follow through on this. And once he does, of course, that by itself is an indicator. That by itself is a marker both of his being attuned to his campaign promises, which has been something which he's taken some flack for recently, particularly in the coronavirus pandemic, but also more broadly to send a signal to his base in particular that he is paying attention to these issues of representation, which obviously is the fundamental underscoring aspect of why he's making this choice or likely to make this choice in the first place.
Another topic, Philip, a top legal advisor, the general counsel to former Vice President Mike Pence, talked at length to the January 6th investigating committee yesterday. Possible significance there?
Yeah, I think any information the January 6th committee can get from anyone who's close to Trump is going to be revelatory, right? Anytime someone sits down and talks to them, they're going to learn more about what occurred on that day and, frankly, in the days prior to and following that day. Obviously, Mike Pence was at the center of the efforts by President Trump to try and wrench the election away from Joe Biden. He put a lot of pressure on Pence. I'm sure the committee is going to be interested in hearing anything they can about the way in which that happened, particularly because there are real outstanding legal questions about his former President Trump's criminal exposure to the idea that he was really trying to get Pence to do something he should not have done. There are all sorts of a range of ways in which that could be something which actually violates law, and they're going to try and find any information they can to figure out whether or not such a boundary is broken. And the closer they can get to Pence providing that information directly, the better able they're going to have a sense of what the big picture was.
Because, Caitlin, Vice President Pence, when he was in that office, did get public, and we are learning, private pressure from President Trump and others. And it seems like those in his inner circle are cooperating with the January 6th House Select Committee. From your perspective, does the former vice president or those close to him have to walk a fine political line with his former boss, former President Trump, or is that bridge in the process of being either demolished or severely burned?
Well, if the former vice president wants a future within this Republican Party for maybe bigger ambitions for himself, he has to toe this kind of fine line politically. Remember when Pence made public statements last year over the summer, he said that, look, the former president and I won't see eye to eye on what happened on January 6th, but I want to focus on the things that we did do together in terms of policy. And that's kind of the line that he's been trying to walk here. But as you mentioned, it's been over a year since January 6th, and the president is still hammering Mike Pence over the actions of that day. In recent interviews, he's been saying that Mike Pence should have overturned the results of the election and did not, even though that would have been unconstitutional, as we all know. So he's still applying that pressure to Pence and still focusing on this. And when you look at the base of the Republican Party right now, and you look at the ways in which those who have ambitions for higher office are not severing ties with the former president, that shows you kind of how much political trouble perhaps Pence could be in if he does in fact have future ambitions. And then there also is this question, of course, about whether Pence himself will be called to testify as well.
So I want to give this question to both of you. Philip, I want to start with you real quick. It's not hard in Washington to talk to people who say, after Afghanistan, the stakes are very high for President Biden with Ukraine and Russia. There's an announcement about President moving more forces in that general neighborhood. Philip, what do you think the stakes are, both as a policy matter and a political matter for the president?
Well, I mean, obviously the stakes are enormous, right? I mean, I think that President Biden finds himself in a very unusual position for a recent American president, which is that he has a population which is very, very averse to the idea of America launching into any new armed conflict, right? This is something that since the invasion of Iraq, essentially, there's been this very strong erosion of the willingness of the American people to interject themselves. I mean, even if you remember when Barack Obama first started to advocate for military action against the Islamic State, there was this group of people who were essentially trapped on a mountain, if I remember correctly, and that even then, trying to rescue them from the Islamic State, that was an issue of contention. Here, the idea of a ground war in Europe, for obviously a lot of reasons, people are, I think, very reticent to embrace that. And yet, at the same time, Biden, unlike President Trump, is very attuned to the idea that the United States has made these commitments, that it has responsibilities on the international stage to uphold treaties and to uphold commitments it has made to its partners. Even if those are not necessarily commitments he wants to follow through on, he, unlike Trump, is not willing to simply say, you know what, the heck with it. I'm not going to I'm not going to adhere to those commitments. And I think that puts him in a very perilous spot, particularly because, as you said, he's already getting low marks on foreign policy. He's having a tough time on his approval, which absolutely will impact the midterm elections. And, this is not what he needs at a bad time. And I'm sure that makes Russian President Vladimir Putin very happy.
Caitlin, your thoughts?
Well, the president does have some bipartisan support for things like sanctions. The Trump era, of course, has scrambled traditional Republican Party politics when it comes to foreign policy, particularly when it comes to Russia. However, there is a lot of pressure, especially heading into the midterms, because even though he does have bipartisan support for some measures and for some action, and you see Republicans wanting him to take a tougher stance on Russia, they are also ready and willing to capitalize on any sort of failure, especially heading into the midterms where control of the House and Senate are at stake, and Republicans seem pretty well poised, at least at this point, to make some gains.
Caitlin, with your permission and with our audience's indulgence, I want to welcome you back from maternity leave and say we're very happy to have you back. And we also want to take a moment to welcome baby Otto to our audience. Tell us a little bit about Otto.
Oh, thank you, Major. It is so great to be back and in your company and with my colleagues and back into the news. And Otto is a great baby. He's a good sleeper. I shouldn't say that out loud, but wow. So far, so good. And we will give him one exception to the no screen time rule so that he can perhaps watch himself make his streaming debut. So thank you so much for this welcome back, and it's good to be back with you all.
Caitlin, here's a tip from a father of 3. Don't tell any of your friends who have similarly aged children that Otto sleeps well.
I was going to say, now that I've said it out loud, he's not going to sleep tonight. I know I jinxed myself.
Jinx it all. Caitlin, Huey-Burns, Philip Bump, thank you so very much.